Ridiculously Happy People Cast. I'm Sophia Levin. I'm talking with Melissa Twist again today. How are you, Melissa?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, but I'm a little bit riled up from the conversation that we had before we started recording. If you have not listened to the previous episodes with Melissa, go back and listen to them. Melissa Twist is from Melissa Twist Events. She is a fantastic wedding planner. We've done a couple episodes so far. I'll link to those in the show notes. But before we got onto this call, Melissa shared some stories with me that got me very mad about weddings. So, but we're not going to talk about those stories. Today, we're talking about private residence weddings. Yes.
Yes.
Now, we have said in the last couple of episodes that you need to know what the heck you want before you start planning your wedding. So, again, if you have not listened to those episodes, go listen to those. But outside of that, we're going to talk about private property weddings. Yay! And this is like your bread and butter, isn't it?
It is. I find a lot of my couples, it's not their property, it's either a family property that they have a connection to, and they want to have their special day there. So I find that I work at a lot of private properties where we're either working off of existing structure, or sometimes if they have a large enough home. But typically we are bringing in a tent and doing a tented wedding. And all the fun logistics that come with doing an outdoor private property wedding. And what I always say during the consultations with my couples, if they think that this will be an easier route than doing a venue, I always try to educate them right off the hop of like, maybe not.
Yeah.
So pairing that, yes, there is ways to try to keep it as simple as possible, but one of the main things that come up is the contingency plan. So as you know, the weather is unpredictable. Just because you're getting married in the summer, there might not be summer weather. Same for fall, spring. So we have to be prepared for that. And one of the big things is having shelter. So having tents, sometimes multiple tents, and then potentially bringing in heat or cooling, uh, depending on the time of the year. Sometimes
Yeah.
both, because you don't know which direction it's going to go in. So there's a lot of moving parts with private property weddings.
Speaking of tents, do you get to do very many just open air weddings? Because we're in Canada, so we get all of the weather.
Yes.
So no.
I find so many times I'm like, let's keep all the walls off. And then the weather has other plans for us. The
Yeah.
temperature drops later on in the evening. Guests aren't prepared for the elements. The walls are going up. So I feel like I've had very few where we've been able to keep the walls off of the tent for the entire event, which is unfortunate because I would love to. I see all these other weddings in different parts of the world and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're not covered. How is this possible? And I know, and in other places in the world that the weather can be a little bit more
Yeah.
predictable. We're here, we're talking about everything prior to
Yeah.
the wedding date to make sure that we um, have a plan for if the weather decides not to cooperate.
That seems to be the big purchase for the um,
Yes.
residential weddings is the tent. So like if people are having a residential wedding and they're having a big enough one or whatever that they want or need to have a tent,
Yeah.
when do they need to get that by? Because I could see, and I think we have to factor in here as well for people that when the tent comes, the tent people set it up.
Yes.
So you're not DIYing that. So the tent
No.
is set up before the day of the wedding.
Yes.
Um, so how can we,
It
I
is
mean, do
really
we
just an
watch? Yeah.
inventory thing. So it's like when I find out about, okay, what are we doing under the tent? So we'll have, I have several different questions, and then that will help me determine how much square footage we're going to need for the tent. And then from there, I would go to the rental companies and see what they inventory. What is the kind of factor is rental companies only have X amount of tents in certain sizes. So once it's sold out, it's sold out. It's not to say that we couldn't go to another rental company or go somewhere a little bit farther to potentially get the inventory that we're looking for the size. But that comes with additional costs with labor and delivery. What is another thing to factor in is a lot of my clients think, oh, well, the morning of the wedding, if it's like going to be perfect, we'll just call and say, we don't want the tent, don't drop it off.
Nope.
Fortunately, that's not how it works. Typically, they have a back schedule. So they have, let's say 15 to 20 weddings that all have tents that need it on the Saturday. They're not setting up Saturday morning. A tent setup happen as early as Tuesday before the wedding
Yeah.
because their staff needs to get out and set up all these different tents all over the area. So that's a little bit shocking to my clients sometimes because they don't realize the work back schedule. I've never had a tent being set up on the actual day of the wedding. It's
Yeah.
always the day before. And the rental companies, you still end up paying for it. So even if you
Yeah.
decide, hey, we don't want it anymore, they've lost out on that piece of business. So unfortunately, the clients still have to pay for the tent, even if they're choosing not to move forward with it. And I've done it before where clients are like, okay, they're supposed to drop off on Wednesday. We're making the call on Wednesday and they decide not to move forward with it because they really don't want it aesthetically. And that's the most nerve-wracking thing as a planner because
Yeah.
so many things can change from like a Wednesday to the Saturday. Even though the weatherman's saying one thing, I've seen it all. So being okay with if we have to move everything inside. So if there's a house or wherever it may be, being very comfortable with that and making sure that we have enough space for all of your
Mhm.
guests to feel comfortable. Because I do not work with clients going to wing it. And if it doesn't work out that we can't be outside, we don't have a plan B. I'm like, no, I'm out. Like, that doesn't work, right?
Yeah. And I would say if you're having a meal, and by that I mean like a seated meal or buffet, but not appetizers. Let's exclude appetizers from this. If people are sitting down and eating, you need to probably have a
Yes.
tent in your plan, unfortunately. But if you have
Yes.
lots of space, you can always just set things up outside of the tent if
Yes.
the weather turns out to be nice. But otherwise, just get the tent and get it set up. But you also don't have to have a tent. You don't have to have a plated meal. You don't have to
Yeah.
like a lot of these in my experience with my couples when I'm doing private goodness gracious, my English today is not great. When I'm doing private residence weddings, it's often my clients' parents who are hosting, and usually it's a very nice house and they still have a giant tent outside. But if you're having a teeny tiny wedding, it can be quite nice to just do appetizers and just let people sort of walk around and chat,
Yes.
and then you can go inside if it's raining or snowing, as the case may be in Canada.
Yes. So just being okay with that. So if it is, we always have to talk about like if we were planning on doing a plated seated dinner and we have to move inside and there wasn't the space for
Yeah.
that, that's a whole conversation with the catering team of like, okay, well, you've now gone to contract with this, but potentially we might be changing what the food looks like so it can be more casual and passed, and we don't need seats for everyone, that sort of thing. So typically when I start kind of talking more about the realistic, plan A, plan B, plan C, most of my clients want to keep it simple. So if they were planning on doing seated outside, they want to still be able to do that in the indoor space.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I totally understand. In which case,
Mhm.
just use the tent. But I will say, warn all of your guests to not wear heels because
Yes.
people walking around in a tent, you're going to mess up the grass. And if it rains at all, you're really going to mess up the grass. And it's hard enough to walk in heels on grass as it is, let alone when it's muddy.
Yes. And I hear it all as a planner. I make sure that it's very clear when clients are communicating with their guests, if it's on their wedding website or however they're communicating with their guests. If it's an outdoor wedding, come prepared for the
Mhm.
if that's umbrella, if that's appropriate shoes. And the amount of times I've seen guests come and I'm like, where did you think you were
Yeah.
going?
Yeah. Yellow, ridiculously happy people. I'm interrupting this regularly scheduled content to ask you for a little favor. If this pod has made you laugh, inspired you, or made you think, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment of our shenanigans. And don't be shy. Share the love by leaving a rating and a review. It's like a virtual high five that helps introduce the show to more ridiculously happy people and helps keep me on track with content that you actually want to hear. So grab your device, unless you're driving, tap that subscribe button, give us a 5-star rating, and write a little review about what you think about this episode. Your support means the world to me. And we're back in 3, 2, 1. For sure.
And then somehow to me, and we're in an open air tent and they're asking, hey, can you turn up the heat? And I'm like, let me do that for you. Right. And we do certain things where I'll ask my clients is like, are we going to budget to purchase blankets or shawls or certain things to be able to help guests if they didn't come prepared, or also flip flops if they come with. But I always think it's like, oh, you wanted to look cute so bad, but then 15
Yeah.
minutes into it, they're instantly regretting
Yeah.
their choices and just wanting to be comfortable. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can imagine. I don't know why anyone chooses to wear heels ever, to be honest with you, but it's a thing. Okay, so that's it. Get a tent, or don't need a tent.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, I'd be very freaked out if it was my wedding day
For sure.
and I had decided not to go the tent route and I don't have enough space inside
Yeah.
the house to accommodate the guests.
Mm-hmm.
And I could guarantee what the weather was going to be like on the wedding day,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, it's completely out of our control. So you just have to,
Yeah.
you know, be prepared.
Yeah. And I hate to say, but a lot of people will be like, "Well, we have a big house. Of course, everyone can fit into the house." But you're not
Yes.
sending them all into the bedrooms and like the flipping laundry room and stuff. So you got to also keep in mind, like, once you get caterers in the kitchen and like people trying to
Yes.
walk around, it's really hard to like move around in a party at all, let alone a wedding with, like, let's say even 50 people. If you put 50 people in your house, would your house be absolutely packed? Because
Yeah.
mine would be. And
Yes.
if you want to like see your guests and stuff, you got to make sure you have enough space to move around because it can be very difficult to do that at a wedding.
Yeah. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, yeah, like you said, in theory, it sounds good. But I'm like, actually think about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
What's the largest party you've had at your house? Oh, that. Well, times that by 6, and that's this
Mm-hmm.
guest count. So,
Yeah.
and then a lot of times when we start talking about would we want to, do stuff on the basement and the main, a lot of times couples are like, no, we want everyone to be together. So they don't want guests to be up. So again,
Yeah.
that goes back to making sure that we have enough space in the tent for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Excellent. Okay. I really want to have a conversation about alcohol.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's very stereotypical that people drink a lot at weddings. And I can say for certain that the one time in my life that I got the most drunk ever was at a wedding. I was not working. It was my cousin's wedding. I got really drunk. But my version of really drunk is pretty tame in comparison to a lot of people's really drunk. When some people get really drunk at weddings, things get completely out of control. And unfortunately, when you're doing these things at your home, you have different liabilities and responsibilities as a host to make sure that people are safe, to make sure that people are not driving home drunk. And generally, you probably don't want people fighting at your wedding. So, what do we do about
Yes.
alcohol? What the heck do we
So
do,
one,
Melissa?
yeah. So one of the things that I always recommend to all of my clients is that we look at providing shuttle service for the guests.
Yes.
Most of my weddings happen in more rural locations where taxis are or Ubers aren't readily available. So making sure that we pre-arrange shuttles to get guests either from their accommodation to this to the private property and back, I think
Hmm.
is super important. Even if guests say, you know what, we're going to drive there, but then we're going to take the shuttle home. It's
Yeah.
it's really important to have because I've seen it all with calling a taxi and it taking, over an hour to get a taxi
Oh,
on
yeah.
property. That's kind of when people can make poor decisions and think, oh, maybe I'm
Mhm.
fine to
Yeah.
drive home. So I think that that's number one, making sure that you have a good bartending team that are smart served and are responsibly serving your guest is really important as well. I like to stay away from the whole, sometimes my clients like to do the whole self-serve. I think it's nice
Mhm.
to have a bartender and wait staff that can be monitoring your guests and slowing them down if they're seeing that they're getting or completely stopping them from over consuming. Because yes, it is a question now that I've added to when we're going through our planning processes. Like, is there certain family dynamics or friend dynamics that we need to be aware of, especially when people get to drinking? Unfortunately, it can bring out the worst in people. So making sure that we're prepared if that is bringing in, unfortunately, the question of do we need security? Hope
Mhm.
most of the time it is no. But what I would like to say to all my couples is if you think there's going to be an issue, maybe they don't make the guest list because unfortunately I've seen it where it has gone sideways and it just takes away from the couple's wedding day. And if you already are aware that a person or people might dynamics at your wedding, maybe choose not to have them there. I
Can we
know,
have a
which is a
little,
hard conversation to have.
well, yeah. And can we have a little conversation about that? Because if you know that this person, this hypothetical person, causes
Hmm.
a dramatic scene whenever they are drinking every time.
Hmm.
So they're probably going to do the same thing at your wedding. Do you want that to happen at your wedding? And then,
Yeah.
therefore, do you want them to come? I find a lot of people get stuck in this, well, we have to invite them. They're family. Like, these are family events. And I'm going to remind you, no, this is your wedding. This is not a family event.
Yes.
So you need to be a little bit more firm sometimes with the things that you do and don't
Yes.
want at
Yes.
your party.
And we've done kind of in the past with couples, we've done kind of an in between where we knew certain guests had issues with alcohol. So we informed the whole bar and wait staff that it was almost like we showed the pictures of a
Yeah.
few people. And then if they tried to get alcohol, the bartender would be like, unfortunately, we only have this selection for you. And the same with the wait staff that they knew not to pour wine for these individuals. And this was at the bride and groom's request, and they were very respectful of it. They
Mhm.
just took that extra step to make sure that it wasn't even a question that was posed to them. It was just already communicated with everyone that was working the wedding that these few individuals were not going to be drinking.
I could see a lot of people being like, but that takes away like their choice to make that decision for themselves. But again, it's your friggin' party.
Yes.
So you get to have the people there that you want, and you also get to have it be, you know, the way that you want it to be. So if you
Yes.
need to set limits for people, then you need to set limits for people. That's just how it
Yeah.
is.
Mhm.
Yeah, man. This actually reminded me, we're talking about um like shuttle services and calling a taxi. And I can say that basically, if you are having your wedding out anywhere outside of a town in this neck of the woods, if you call a taxi, it's going to take an hour or more
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
there. There isn't another option. I've had to call a taxi from outside of Midland, and I think it took 2 hours to get there.
Wow.
So, these, it's just the reality of the thing. Okay, here's another thing. You might not have really good like internet service.
Yes. Yes.
So are you playing your own music and are you playing your own music on your phone? It might be a good time to download all of that music to your
Yes.
phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I always, if we're doing anything with, yes, taking those, there's been so many AV things where I'm like, we
Oh,
need a
yeah.
separate phone, everything's downloaded to it. The only purpose of this phone is to play music because a lot of times it's always, oh yeah, we've created some, playlists on Spotify or Apple Music, wherever, and it's always an afterthought. And I'm like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
This can't be a phone that you are using to make calls
Mhm.
or do anything
Yes.
on. It has to be a dedicated and phone to just music. Make sure you have the cords to be able to charge it because that is such a thing that where you're playing music and 2 seconds later it needs to be charged. So that's super important that we have it being charged at the same time as it's playing music because all of a sudden when there's no music and it's
Yeah.
dancing time, people go a little bit crazy if they can't get technology to work. So making sure that we've taken every step to make sure that we're in the best case scenario when it comes to play when it comes to dancing time.
For sure. And making sure you have the power for these things and probably
Yes.
not have like all the catering stuff and all of the music stuff and all of the lights on the same system because if one goes down, they all go down,
Yes.
which is
And
a lot of
making
fun.
sure that you have the right connection. Like I have that in my kit now, but it is every phone has different adapters to be
Yeah.
able to plug into the speaker. So like not even thinking about that is like okay, so do we have everything we need? What is this what speaker are we plugging into? What are the
Yeah.
connections that it needs? So making sure that we have the wires to actually plug in because that's happened in the past. We're like, oh no, we didn't think it was this. We were not compatible with how we're the speaker. So
Yeah. I always have to buy a couple of adapters. I swear every year there's a couple of adapters that I have to get for like random things. Not anything super important, but you always need an adapter for something.
it's crazy how it's so important. And even I'll work with like bands and I'm like, oh, so here's how, so in between sets, it's typical that sometimes the clients want to provide the set list that they play. And even a band, I'm like, oh, you can plug this into your speaker, right? Oh no, we don't have the
Yeah.
adapter. And I'm like, oh gosh, like, so trying to, hey, share my Spotify
Yeah.
with who with the end to be able to play it on their phone, but then we don't have Wi-Fi and we can't connect. Like it's just like, hey, I'm sending it to you, not receiving. So like being prepared is definitely important.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, if you're planning on doing these things in the country, I mean, you just need to
Yes.
do these things, right? You just need to
Yes.
make sure that you have everything that you need. And I mean, you could do it a wedding without power altogether. Could be
Yes.
interesting.
I haven't be really interesting. Have you done something like that before?
No, but I could see in a controlled scenario doing
Yeah.
like candles and like just chilled wine and
Yes.
appetizers and you don't
Yes.
need all of the complicated stuff. But I mean, yeah, if you're planning on having the music and the dancing and everything, you need to have those things. You need to bring in the dance floor. You need to bring in the power, the speakers,
Yeah.
all of it.
That would be an amazing because power is typically something that will keep me up in the middle of the night, especially when we're in a field and we're relying on generators and everyone needs a
Yeah.
little bit of power. So it is, you don't realize when you're in a venue,
Yeah,
oh, when we're in the middle of field and we brought in the power, how important it is to so many elements of the wedding day.
I know. I don't think we
Mhm.
really think about electricity these days.
Yeah.
Okay, you also probably want to talk to your neighbors.
Yes. One of the things I always say to my clients, even though sometimes they're like, we don't really have neighbors, we're on 150 acres. It
You
is
do.
just a nice gesture
Yeah.
to let them know, hey, on this date, there's a wedding happening. and like a nice just note or a gesture, a bottle of wine or whatever it may be, a nice candle to give them the heads up. So if noise carries,
Yeah.
and give them the opportunity to maybe go away for the night or give them opportunity to kind of prepare, and not be like, oh my gosh, what's happening over here? And then also it's nice if you do feel comfortable. Another thing that I suggest to my clients is that if you are friendly enough with them, maybe have them be part of the wedding. Be like, oh, after dinner, feel free to come over for like a drink and a dance
Yeah.
type thing. So they feel like they're part of it. Um, it's always, knock on wood, I've never had the cops be called on any of my clients because we do take
Yeah.
and most of the time people aren't, they know it's a wedding, it's a one-off thing. This isn't happening every weekend, and that they can deal with the extra noise for one night of the year.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
People are often surprised by how well sound carries. It does.
Yes.
Your neighbors will be able to hear you.
Mhm. And just the extra
Oh,
cars and traffic on the road, and just so that they're like prepared. I just think it's a nice just gesture.
oh yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
All right. What else do we need to know about private property? Oh, this reminds me, permits and stuff.
Hmm.
What do you need for having a
So
wedding at your house?
unfortunately, even though tents are not permanent structures, pretty much every square footage in every municipality they work require um, a permit. So you have to go, each township or municipality works a little bit different. So if you're over a certain square footage, it's almost like we are building a permanent structure. So they have to go through a permit process that I help my clients with typically, and they have an engineer come out and inspect the tent after it has gone up. So that's just an extra step in the process that is just, I to help my clients through that. So a lot of people are like, what? This is like, it's up for 24 hours. Why are we having to do all this extra work? But it's just kind of one of those things.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes in the different municipalities, they have noise bylaws, and you can make a request to have an exception to that bylaw. So I can help you through that process and what it looks like. Sometimes it's just like clients being like, okay, we know there's no noise after this time, so we're just reducing the volume on the music. Um, I have most of my clients, there is insurance that I work with that gives them extra protection over the wedding weekend. And so I make that recommendation to my clients just to take that extra step so that they're protected. And then some people want to get the special occasion permit, even if they're not selling liquor. And that's done through the LCBO. But there is, yeah, some extra steps that you do need to take when working off of your private property that people aren't aware of. And so I help them through that process of what that looks like when we go to contract together, because each municipality works a little bit differently on what they need for a private property event.
Mhm. And you mentioned having servers, for example, or bartenders who are smart serve
Mhm.
certified. Um,
Yes. So that's
do
important,
you?
and that's something that
Yeah,
the caterer manages. So it's
yeah.
something to ask, directly to your caterer. You're assuming that their staff is trained and equipped to do their job, and having the smart serve is something that should be part of all of their training. So that's directly with the catering company.
Mhm. Wonderful. And what if
So go
this
ahead.
special occasion permit, are people getting this when they're doing like, um, just the troughs full of ice and drinks, like
Yeah,
for self?
so when we're doing any large order with the LCBO, they recommend so typically we're purchasing large amounts of liquor, and so it's anytime you're purchasing booze for a private property, even if it's for a small event as well.
Yeah, probably
The
smart.
logistics of making sure that when working off a private property, I always say make sure to the whole guest experience from start to end. So if guests are going to be leaving after dark, what does their walk back either to their car, so the parking lot, or where the shuttles are going to be picking them up? That's something that's normally like forgotten about because typically,
Yeah.
everything's happening during the day, but you want to make sure that your guests have enough light and to
Mhm.
be able to get back to where they're going. And I know most
My
people do have flashlights, obviously lights on their phone, but it's just a nice to take that extra time to make sure that we are bringing in a little bit of extra light to make sure that they're not, because in some of these rural properties, when it
yeah.
gets dark, it gets dark. So
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking when you were saying that too, whenever I have a farm wedding, the
yeah.
parking is always in like a pasture, and those pastures have like divots. That's why when you're driving through it, your car's going way up and down, and it's really
Mhm.
easy to injure yourself in there actually,
Yeah.
and also really hard to see. So yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Very good point. What else do we need to
And
know about planning for a residential wedding? Like,
well, I find having very honest conversations with whoever the host is. So if that's the parents, the uncle and aunt, the grandparents, whoever it may be, so that there's no frustration through the planning process of like how involved are they or how not involved, and making sure that they understand. Sometimes they think it's just the day, and I'm like, no, there will be a load and schedule. So like you could see vendors as early as the Tuesday before the wedding day. And so being transparent of like, okay, do they want to be a point person for vendors? Do they want to be completely hands off? And that's something where I come in and like sometimes people want to be more involved. Other times they're like, no, we want to be completely hands off. And so I'm there more for those kind of load in details. And then also being able to say, okay, if there is a house on the property, having who's allowed in the house, because it's shocking how many times we'll
yeah,
build this beautiful tent and all this decor and all this great stuff happening over here, but
yeah,
people guests want to go into the house,
yeah.
and sometimes the owner of the house are not okay with that. So having clear communication with who is allowed and who's not allowed. And typically that's
Mhm.
adding some signage on the main house to make sure that everyone's feeling like they're being respected, right? Because there is there is a lot of stuff that goes into weddings, and so think it is something that when you are the host, just having that clear expectation, and then sometimes they want to get more involved and like, oh, we need to fix this garden bed. We need to fix the siding on the house or this. So it turns into this
Mhm.
big project for them. So having those clear kind of conversations at the beginning of like what the couple expects from the
Mhm.
host, if anything at all.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. You know, if I ever get married, I'm probably going to call you. You'll love my wedding. I've already planned it out. It'll be like 30 people and no tent because 30 people can go inside if it starts to
Yes.
rain.
Yes.
Um, but I will say most of the weddings that I photograph on private properties are still like 100 guests, and
Yes.
you know, they're absolutely beautiful, but it's just a different set of things that you have to address because you have to bring everything in for your wedding. And I know
Yes.
a lot of people book venues and then you have a venue coordinator and you think that's good, they're going to help me plan the wedding. Like you still might want to have a planner for your venue wedding, but if you're having a 100 person wedding on private property, even 50, even 40, you definitely want to bring in a planner. This is something that you want to budget for because you're not going to remember all of the things that you need to do for it. And there's no like checklist that covers 100% of what you need to have for your residential wedding. And also, those checklists could have been written in, California, India, wherever, where the
Yes. For
bylaws and everything
sure.
are different. You need someone local who's done it before, who knows what you need to have.
And
Like
then
here,
time.
if it's September and you're having a wedding on your property, you do want to have heaters and blankets and like everything available because it gets flipping cold in the evening. Um,
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought about that. I wouldn't have thought to get heaters.
Yeah. And sometimes this goes the opposite way. I've had some of the hottest
Yeah.
days of the summer be in September. So that's why I say we talk about every scenario, and my couples are
Yeah.
like, "You're nuts." And I'm like, "Nope,
Yeah.
we're talking about this. We have a plan." And then they're like, they get it after
Yeah.
when something goes down. They're like, thank you, because we wouldn't have thought about this. We had a plan in place. There wasn't any of this like fury of the week of the wedding of like running around and trying to figure things out. We've already talked about it enough. We've already put plans in place.
Hi, I'm Becky Waples, the host of the Small Towns Big Dreams podcast. The podcast that celebrates small town creators and shares their stories. From their background to where they found their courage, from their challenges to their wins, from where they found their inspiration to how they took their first step. Join us each week to hear how each guest turned their big dreams into reality. If you are a creator, an entrepreneur, or love someone who is, subscribe now to the Small Towns Big Dreams podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and let's grow together.
I'm Lauren Best, and in my podcast, I have conversations with compelling creatives and answer your questions. I dive into what I've learned as a voice coach and performance poet, and share why over 15 years of music leadership has shaped my collaborative approach. I reveal how I've reawakened my own creativity. Subscribe to my new show, Lauren's Best, wherever you get your podcasts. Join me on Substack for exclusive bonus content, laurenbest.substack.com.
Hey, listen up. Tamara here from the Clean It Club podcast interrupting. Sorry, not sorry. I just wanted to let you know that if you love this podcast, you might just love the Clean It Club as well. We are all about deep cleaning our lives from the inside out, digging those skeletons out of our closets and letting go of what no longer serves us. So roll up your sleeves, dust off those life lessons, and join me and my friends as we learn how to navigate our way to a life with more love, more laughter, and maybe less piles of laundry. Find the Clean It Club podcast on Spotify.
So yes, definitely when you're doing a private property wedding, there's so many moving parts and you don't want to feel like you're working your own wedding. So I think that it is super important to hire a wedding planner just because they're managing all these different aspects of things. And like you said, we're bringing in power, we're bringing in washrooms in most of the cases. So water, all of these things that you wouldn't think about when you're going to a venue where it's turnkey and most of those elements are already built in. So yeah.
They make some really good portable washrooms these days, by the way.
Yes. Gorgeous ones. And everyone
Yeah.
always goes like, oh, I hope that you're not talking about like those blue construction
Oh,
work. I'm like, no, they've come a long way with the
oh yeah.
porcelain sinks and the laminate floors and like
Mhm.
all the things. So people
Yeah.
are always like, I always hear the guests like, whoa, this is fancy. Yeah.
Every time people are commenting on how fancy the bathrooms are. And the
Yeah,
hilarious
because they're
thing is,
not expecting it, right? They're going
it's true.
to a country wedding or an outdoor wedding. You're all thinking, oh no, what is this going to be like? And then it's funny how sometimes after a few drinks, some of the guys aren't even using like the couple paid a lot of money for the to bring in these toilets, and they're just going into the open fields. I'm like,
Maybe
okay.
another thing to add to your list, like a P spot sign just out in the front.
Yes,
Just keep
yes.
going. It's over there. Just keep going until you find the sign.
Yeah, I've been kind of running around and doing kind of like pulling things out for inventory bar, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and just like out of
Oh
nowhere, there's like a
no.
guest right there. I'm like, oh gosh. Yeah, they didn't want to wait in line, clearly.
That's hysterical. And not
Mhm.
surprising. I didn't really think about that. I bet there is a number of people who are I can't wait. I have to go. I have to go right now.
Yeah, and if I always try to get the washrooms as close to the reception tent as possible, but even if
Yeah.
there's like a little bit of a walk, sometimes people are like, this is more convenient.
True.
Right
That is
here.
also a good point.
Yeah.
What else do we need to know about planning for your private property wedding?
I think that one of the main things from this episode is definitely working with an expert. I've been doing this now coming up close to a decade of specifically the private property weddings. And it's interesting how I feel like every time I'm learning a little bit more that I'm adding to kind of
Yeah.
my process. So it is really important to be working with an expert because they've seen it, they know the different scenarios that can happen. So it's super important to, like you said, you might find a checklist or you think you know what is the best way to go about things, but I think it is very important for you to work with an expert so that you can actually sit back and enjoy your wedding and not be thinking about all the moving parts. And then the second part to it is, unfortunately, if you think
Yeah.
doing a private property wedding is going to be easier than working with a venue or less expensive, I've heard that as well. The venue's free. How can you get better than free? But I always say they're just think of a venue and a kitchen from ground up in most cases. So we're bringing everything in. So the money you would have saved on the venue buyout, you will make up in all the other things.
Yeah, like the porta potties and
Yes,
the
yes. And some of these
generators
washrooms that we've talked about can add up. Like I'll give the quotes and they'll be like, what, $2,000-$3,000 for washrooms?
but
So
they're really pretty and they smell good. So
yes, yes. And we don't want to be dealing with any of that, right? Someone comes and picks it up and
yeah,
it's
it's true.
gone and yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Mhm.
So I had another question, but I cannot remember what it was at the moment. So I'm going to spring another little question on you, or not really a question at the moment, but when we were talking before we got on this call, it just dawned on me that when you're looking at vendors, do not just go by social media. What
Yeah.
you see on social media, because that can fool you. Like the food could look really good, the photos could look fantastic, but remember that social media is a highlight reel. And they're not putting everything into their social media, including complaints from their clients, complaints from
Mhm.
other vendors, like anything like that. Make sure that you're reading reviews. And
Yeah.
if you can even get a hold of their previous clients, that's fantastic because unfortunately, like we talk about social media from a mental health perspective, that just scrolling through social media can really screw with how you value yourself. But it can also screw with your wallet if you are relying solely on social media to book your wedding vendors.
Yes. I think that's super important. I always like say to my clients that take a look at their different platforms, the reviews as well. And then if they're still not sure, most vendors I work with, they'll be like, do you want me to put you in contact with some of my previous clients so you can speak directly to them about your experience working with me? And if it is, you're still having questions or concerns about certain elements of that vendor's process. So I think it is super important to do your own research and make sure that you feel comfortable with everything because you're not always going to have the opportunity to have like a friend or a family member who've already worked with that vendor. So taking the time to do your own research is super important and relying on people that have been doing this for a while, like myself and you, that you can say, yeah, I've worked with so and so and they were great to work with and these were the reasons why.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely rely on the other vendors that you're working with to give you recommendations as well, especially if
Yes.
you're working with a wedding planner. And I will say, when we were talking about working with a wedding planner for your private property wedding, some people will sort of lean on their other vendors. Me, for example, and I've heard this comment from a lot of people before, oh, you've planned a lot of weddings. I have not planned a single wedding. I have not planned one single wedding. I photographed a lot of weddings, but
Yes.
even you're saying, like, how long have you been doing this? 20 years now? And
20
you're saying
years. Yeah.
you're still changing things. You're still learning
Yes.
things, So, yeah, I'm not an expert in planning weddings. So I can give you advice on who to talk to.
Yes.
what I've seen, but
And,
that's about it.
and we were talking about this. It's like I had a doozy, amazing couples last season, all amazing couples in the 23 season. Some very, I like to use the word interesting vendors
Yeah.
of things that if I, tell the stories, some people are just like in disbelief. And there was nothing I could do to prepare for what they were going to throw at me. And I'll talk to other coordinator, vendor, wedding planner friends of mine, colleagues, and I'm like, so guess what happened? And they're like, oh my gosh, never in their careers have they experienced some of the things that happened to me last season. So there's always things that come up, and it's just working with the clients didn't know at all what was going on. And then after the fact, they're like, so I'm like, oh, and they're like, I had no clue that that was happening. So it's good to have an expert so that they're there, like myself, that can react and keep calm and carry on and find a solution really quickly. It's like, okay, this is what's been presented. How do we fix this? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, now that I think about it, is there any recommendations that you have for couples for preparing their vendors for their private property wedding? Like, what should they be telling them? Obviously, power, no power. There will be information that you need to get from them as well. Like, if you're bringing in a caterer, they're going to need to know, are they cooking it there? Are they cooking it elsewhere?
Yes.
Like what,
Yeah, so it just is extra steps that I find as a planner that we have to take where we're not working in a venue, it's pretty streamlined, where I have my process where when we're working out in the middle of the field with no power and all the elements, it's super important for certain vendors to do site visits. So they really have a grasp of like what the property is like, and they understand kind of like all the moving parts, especially when it comes to the caterer. But I tend to have a more extensive planning process with those specific vendors, because that could be site visit, like I said, multiple planning calls. So they have a full understanding of what the floor plan looked like, what are the power specs, where are their staff, if they need a green room or a staff room, where that's going to be located. Are we going to even be able to provide that to them? It is, I make sure to ask all the questions, because it is shocking how sometimes like a band will show up and they're like, where's our green room? And I'm like, we have a tent, like this is it. So I make sure to, if certain things are and clearly outlined in our contract, that we're having conversations about it and making alternate arrangements if we can't exactly execute on what they're looking for in their contract. It's like, we don't have, an AC space for you, but we do have a shed.
Yeah.
That I will put a table and chairs in for you and set up as a green room. But so just making sure that there's clear communication, so there's no kind of like, oh my gosh, why isn't this happening? And it is interesting when I work with vendors where you knew it was a private property, right? And they're still kind of trying to figure out, oh, where is this, like it is a venue. So just taking those extra steps to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah. What other advice would you give to couples who are planning on not booking a venue for their wedding?
Like I said, work with the planner and just make sure that you understand that it is going to end up being more planning than working with the venue, and just having everyone be on the same page with that. But if you're working with a great planner and great vendors, like relying on wanting to know that your vendors also, it sounds silly because I do it all the time, but it is an outdoor wedding. Are you okay with being, exposed to elements? Is this going to affect your work? Unfortunately, that has to be almost a conversation, because there has been, situations in the past where we were talking in a previous episode, I believe, about, working off of the Bruce Trail.
Yeah.
And fully explained, I think it's self-explanatory, like Bruce Trail, whatever. And one of the vendors, as soon as we arrived to the location of where the ceremony was happening, was asked me, where is the washroom? And I was like, I floated in a porta potty for you right here, just for you to use. The washroom, yeah. So it's all around you. So certain things like that was interesting where I came prepared. I had tissues with me and hand sanitizer. They were asking me to use my supplies. Let's just say that. They didn't come prepared. So now I'll say, we're on the Bruce Trail. There will be no washroom. Please bring your own TP and hand sanitizer as certain things that you just didn't think needed to be a conversation, I guess do. So
Yeah. The one time I've done a wedding off of the Bruce Trail, thankfully, it was like 20 minutes from my house and it was like a 1 hour wedding. So it was like, I did not have to pee in the woods. I would if I had to.
Mhm.
And I hope that everyone else would too. But yeah, I get that.
I just was like, I turned to them and I'm like, sorry, the washroom? Oh,
It's all around you.
where would you like to go?
If you don't have
Yes.
any other specific advice for people, do you have a ridiculously happy moment?
Happy moment for me this week is that through the WPIC, which is the Wedding Planner Institution of Canada, I've signed up for a course about sustainable weddings and best practices. So I'm super happy about that.
I'm looking forward to hearing about that. We're gonna schedule a coffee.
Yes.
When is that?
So it's starting next week, actually.
Oh, cool. Excellent. Yeah, we're so having coffee after that. So I could be like, so what's a sustainable wedding?
I know, and it is hard to just taking small steps, right? And it is tricky because the weddings are by definition not sustainable. So
yeah, for sure. All right. That's really cool. I'm so looking forward to hearing about that. My ridiculously happy moment is that last Friday, I walked into the studio, I took 2 steps and I dropped my water bottle on the floor and it smashed and there was flipping water everywhere because I like giant water bottles, so I had to get a new water bottle and I got this water bottle and you're not going to see it unless you're looking at the video on YouTube.
wow.
But it's got a straw.
That is so fancy.
It's got a strap. It's got pockets. It has pockets.
That is amazing. So if you drop it's like with this guy, you can drop it and it doesn't look like you could do any damage to that thing. It looks like it's wearing a life jacket.
It'll probably still break if it lands the right way, but it'll probably be mostly okay. Also, there's a strap, so I can just put it over top of my body and then I'll be good. But it's flipping fantastic. I've been drinking so much water. I feel rehydrated. It's been great.
Yeah, I'm visualizing you like on wedding days, like with all your other gear and then having that strapped to you. It's one of those things where I always bring my big water bottle. It ends up getting tossed somewhere in the corner. And then it's like, 10 hours has gone by. I haven't taken a sip of water. And then I'm just like chugging water at the end of the night, realizing that I haven't had anything to drink all day.
I will say I avoid drinking water at weddings because I don't want to have to take the time to run to the washroom.
Yes. Yeah.
I never thought about it, but I might actually wear this and like wear it. Drink from it periodically when I'm at a wedding. That's a very good point because I could carry it with me then. And I might.
Add to all your gear.
Yeah, I will be that dork. I'm okay with it. That's awesome. All right. Where can people find you, Melissa?
So they can find me at my website, www.melissatwist.ca, as well as my Instagram under the same name.
Excellent. You've been listening to Ridiculously Happy Peoplecast. I'm Sophia Lemon. I photograph ridiculously happy people, and you can find me on Instagram at Ridiculously Happy People, and that's spelled PPL. And on Facebook and on Pinterest and at my website at sophialemon.com. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.